Today on Locked On Red Wings, is the general manager Steve Yzerman untouchable?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm a podcast producer for the Daily J, WWJ News Radio podcast. Well, Scotty's the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today's episode is brought to you by, you guessed it, FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook.
I did guess it. I was thinking, I was like, this episode's got to be brought to you by FanDuel.
You're just so smart, and you got good taste. Official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And Scotty, in today's episode, this is a discourse. This is something that we brought up to each other off air a couple of weeks ago about whether or not it's okay. And this discourse began when the Verona thing became when he got waived. And we asked each other, like, should we talk about when it becomes acceptable to criticize Yzerman? And we said, okay, well, we have the All-Star break coming up. All-Star break came and went, and we didn't have a chance to talk about it. But now it's back in the discourse again on Twitter, especially because Sean Shapiro tweeted out asking that very question. And hey, no episode or no game today, so no better opportunity to talk about it than now. Then in segment 3, we'll do a game preview for the game against the Calgary Flames. But I mean, let's just air it out right off the bat here, Scotty. You know, this is year 4 of the Yzerman regime. He joined in 2019. 2019 was his first draft.
Do you remember where you were? I remember where I was.
I was watching TV at my old job at Hockeytown Authentics in Troy, and I was watching the press conference. Yeah,
nice. Yeah,
but
that's just that whole day. I remember it was so surreal. I was working a job where I was with like a lot of customers, like face to face with a lot of customers all day, and I mean, for the next 6 hours, like that day, I just remember constantly everybody walking up, oh, like Yzerman's back, like he's back. That was really a surreal day for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a surreal day, and I was super pumped about it. Ken Holland initially stayed on as like an advisor or whatever it was, and then like a week later was gone to Edmonton.
One of my best friends is a Red Wings fan first and then an Oilers fan second. And I remember just giving him a ton of heat when they got Ken Holland. I was like, you can't get away from him.
Yeah. So he obviously has a lot of cachet and had a lot of carte blanche coming in because, one, he took over a team that was in the pits. The Red Wings at that time were awful. This is now a team in transition, and we are beginning to want to see the fruits of the labor. And this discourse is happening where people are saying or beginning to become critical, or in some people's opinions, not becoming critical enough of the moves Yzerman has made up until this point. And I guess the question I want to ask first and foremost, Scotty, to you is Steve Yzerman untouchable?
No, that's preposterous. Like, no one is untouchable. That's insanity. But I think that there is a everyone has to like be so like super far into like like he's absolutely untouchable and he can do nothing wrong, or like the other extreme, which is like this, you have to be critical of everything he's done. He's provided nothing. He's like so overrated. This is terrible. Like, you can be critical of moves and be optimistic about the direction the organization is headed. And that's where I find myself. I think that there has not been a single GM in the history of sports that has hit on every single move they've made. That's impossible. Like, I mean, you know, if you ask certain people, everybody has their own opinion. I would ask you as a listener to like literally pause the show right now and think to yourself, what percentage of moves does a GM need to hit on for me to consider them a good GM? Just think about that number in your head. Yzerman has not missed often. He hasn't. But it is just as preposterous as to say, oh, this is awful and he's done nothing and there's been no improvement. It's just as ridiculous to me to say oh, he's shooting 100% as well, because no GM ever has, no front office ever has. That's ridiculous. And so the goal is to head in the right direction, hit on the big moves you make, and take the correct chances, the calculated risks, hit on most of the calculated risks. And it's more of a general, like on a bar graph. The dots may be all over the place, but you want a positive correlation. And I think that's where we are. I think we're undeniably in a better place as a franchise now than we were when he took over. And we're still heading in a very positive direction if you look in the immediate future of the next 2 or 3 years as well. But that doesn't mean that he's been a perfect GM, because no one has. That's insane. He can be the best GM in hockey and not shoot 100%. So
I agree with you. I think that for the most part, Yzerman still has done a really good job as general manager.
Agreed.
But this argument that you should or should not be able to criticize him, I tweeted it out earlier. So if you really want to know my answer, like I actually tweeted it out hours before, actually by the time you're listening to this, a whole day before we talked about it. You're free to criticize anything that Yzerman does, and that no one is above criticism. And we gave carte blanche early, and even this offseason, we were joking around saying, trust the Yzer plan. But in all reality, every single move he does as general manager is open to criticism. And in fact, we were critical of him signing Ben Sherratt, who we will talk about, I'm sure, at a certain point in this podcast, as one of the failings so far at least, somebody who he signed to a big contract who's vastly underperformed. But, it's also important to know that, like you said, this team has taken steps forward each and every year he has been general manager. I mean, they bottomed out in 2019, 2020 season,
1920, yeah,
with a win percentage of like 0.291. The next season, it was 0.4 something. The next season was 0.49. This year so far, you're just above a 0.500. So it has been incremental improvements. But what I think is happening here, Scotty, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the frustration and the criticism is beginning to come out, because now this is no longer a team that is expected to be in the basement. There is now an expectation set with this hockey team. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration begins, is now this is a team in transition. When this was a basement dweller team, we could all freely joke around and say, trust the Yzer plan, because nothing mattered. Every move Yzerman made was taking a flyer on a guy that may or may not pan out. Guys like Robbie Fabry, who we've brought up 1,000 times, panned out. He's turned into a pretty good middle six winger for the Detroit Red Wings. Guys like Brendan Perlini didn't work out. Guys like Eric Comrie didn't work out for the Red Wings. I mean, there are 1,000 other guys whose names I can't even remember at this point, who they took in on a flyer and then didn't work out.
You remember Brome?
Oh my God, Matthias Brome is
I almost bought
example.
a Brome jersey, and I'm so serious. You can go find the episode. It was Nolan and I.
I'm
it
sure
was
I
very early on, and I was like, I'm bagging a jersey by the end of the year.
So my point being here is, early on, it was easy to just sit back, relax, and trust the Yzer plan, because there were no expectations at that time. The reason why now it's becoming a little bit more accentuated, this idea that to criticize, and Yzerman should have always been open to criticism, because now there's implications behind the moves he's making. The signings he made in this free agency are going to have impact on this team on the future. The draft picks that he's making are going to very soon have huge impacts on this team for the future coming. So yeah, it's okay to criticize Steve Yzerman and the moves that he makes, but it's also important to realize, like you said, everyone is so far on either side. Like, either every move he's made has been a bust, or just absolutely blindly trust it. No, no one's perfect. No, legit. People brought up Joe Sakic. How long was he the general manager of the Colorado Avalanche before they became this powerhouse? How long was Yzerman the general manager of the Tampa Bay Lightning before they became 2-time Stanley Cup winners and 3-time Stanley Cup final appearances? In his tenure as GM, and he got there, and he already had Steven Stamkos, and I think it was either Hedman or Kucherov. I can't remember which guy he had off the top of my head. I'm sorry, bad fan in me. But he already had those two guys, but they made the playoffs, missed the playoffs, went to the Stanley Cup final, went to the conference final, then missed the playoffs. They were an up and down team. Rebuilds aren't linear, like you said. Like it's all about the dots, man. So I guess my question to you is, like, do you think that the criticism is like warranted? Do you think it's warranted at this point with where this team is at for the criticism to begin to flow?
We should go to break first.
Okay, I'll ask you. I'll re-ask you that question.
Because unless you want to break at the 13 and a half minute mark on today's show, I think we should probably roll it
That's
now.
fair. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I cheesed that one up for
really
you.
Enthusiastic, man.
Yeah, I cheesed that one up for you. The only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the #1 sportsbook in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. There's so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet on Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and easy to use. Best of all, you get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NHL. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty, let me re-ask the question I asked before I got to the break. When it comes to criticism and criticizing Steve Yzerman's moves, at what point in your eyes is it like acceptable to become critical of the decisions he is making as general manager?
The second that he put pen to paper and decided to become the general manager of the Detroit Red Wings, I don't think that there's you can be critical of every individual move in a vacuum. That's the point. That's everybody. If there was one way to build a championship winning team, everyone would be incredible all the time. And like everyone would be fighting to follow the one path, but there's not. Every player is their own individual, unique like set of skills and stuff. And there is a million different ways to build a winner. And that's what makes the job so difficult and so fascinating. And so everyone is not only going to have, but should have their own subjective opinion on how a team is being built or on how if they like or don't like an individual move or trade. The first move he ever made, you can criticize if you dislike it.
You know what's funny is we talk about how we're all like trust the Yzer plan, and this rang true when he drafted him, but there was a fair amount of criticism when it happened as well. And so, we may have this like revisionist history where we talk about how we've always been blindly following him and we all joked trust the Yzer plan. But the moment he drafted Moritz Seider, people were critical of that. People said it was a reach. I said it was a reach because he was so much lower on the most people's draft boards. So there's always been criticism of Steve Yzerman. It's just kind of been washed over with let's be honest, trust the Yzer plan was always just code for let's give him time. Let him cook.
For sure.
And now he's cooking, and we're starting to see what dishes come out onto the table.
Right. It's not... It's hard for me to articulate like where I stand. Like I think it's so ridiculous that the two like polarizing sides are like everything is bad and this this is I'm critical of everything he does and I haven't liked a move he's made in years and this organization's not in a good place and he hasn't done a good job versus like I have blind faith and will not be critical of anything. Like I think the organization is in a significantly better spot than it was when he took over. I think he's one of the best GMs in this sport, and I think he is proving that. I think we are trending in a great direction. But that doesn't mean that he just like got a free pass for 3 years. Like he earned a lot of it. He made a lot of good moves. I think he's made arguably more good moves than bad moves. I think he has limited the mistakes or bad moves that he has made have been surrounded by like concrete walls, right? So like if there's an explosion, it's like, okay, that's limited damage. Like it's not going to hinder us. He hasn't made a move that has set back the plan going forward. It's been like in a vacuum. Obviously you mentioned earlier, like we talk about Sherratt. That doesn't look great so far. Is the Ben Sherratt contract or having him on the team going to prevent the Red Wings from taking the next step in their development in this rebuild? No, that's ridiculous to think. If he does everything else well. Now, if it's that, piled on with another one, that's a different conversation. Like that's a stretch of poor moves. Like this is a what have you done for me lately position, but you also have to look at the last 4 years and the trend, and it is undeniably trending upwards and has taken steps upward pretty much every single year. And it's not only the production at the NHL level. Like I want consistent, maintained success. I talk about this with the Detroit Tigers all the time. Like all the best organizations in sports are deep. They have insane organizational depth. That's what makes them so incredible. And in a salary cap sport, that makes it even more valuable because you need to, I can't pay that person, whatever. Like we're going to let them walk because we're confident that we can fill that hole. And again, undeniably, do you remember what this like farm system was when Ken Holland left?
I think you bring up a really good point by asking that question.
Horrid. It was terrible. It was dry. It was barren. So like
that's the cost of winning championships, mind you.
Yeah, a lot of times it is. Absolutely. I'm not, the Ken Holland era is a different, that was what it was, but like
it's a different conversation, different episode.
Pretty much given discrete instructions to just keep the streak going as long as possible. And, whatever, like that's how he did that. But this was a horrible NHL team that was trending downwards and and zero prospects to look forward to really at all. Like the young players on the team that you had to look forward to had already made the NHL. Like Larkin had been up for a couple of years by then. Like Burt had just come up. Like Mantha. Like that they had already debuted. So like Yzerman has not only improved the NHL team, trending positively pretty much each of the last 3 years, but the farm has also, I think, undeniably gotten better over each of the last 3 years too. Both things that make up an organization are trending upwards, and like it's just, I don't know. It's weird to me that we have to be like all in or all out. We can just be like, okay, each move, we should be critical of each move. Like that's absolutely true. But we can also see that the direction we're heading is good.
I kind of touched on this at the beginning of the episode, Scotty. And this frustration that Red Wings fans are having, this beginning of becoming critical of the moves Yzerman has made, you know what it is it's a good thing. Because if you're there's no general manager in history, and you said this, and there's no general manager in history that is perfect. That just doesn't happen. Unless you're Ken Holland in the 2002 season with no salary cap, and you can just bring in Hall of Famers. Outside of that season, it does not happen. And so when you're seeing fans get frustrated during this transitional period when the team's no longer just accumulating draft picks, but actually trying to take that step forward, the frustration means that Yzerman has built this team to a point where fans are expecting improvement. And we have seen improvement. And I'm not going to talk in a circle. We've already touched on that. We have seen improvement. But if we're getting to a point where we're being frustrated and we're being critical of the good moves he's made, obviously drafting Seider and drafting Raymond, those were phenomenal picks. Seider's a true number one defenseman, and he's had an incredible bounce back since pairing with Woolman. He's the Calder winner. Raymond might just be the best player from his draft class between him and Stützle. It's hard to tell, but he took him fourth, and the Wings should have had the first overall draft pick. Then you couple that with the bad things. The bad things being, obviously, the Ben Chiarot signing looks like it's not going to age very well, at least thus far. He's underperforming for sure. Other guys you brought in are still up for debate. People debate whether or not Kubalik was worth it at $2.5 million. We kind of agree that, but he doesn't play a lot of defense, or people are frustrated.
More of a debate than Kubalik will.
He's going to be one that we agree is going to take a little bit more time because of the core surgery. We're willing to give him a full year to judge, and he's been playing better lately. But, he made some he ate up a lot of the available cap space this last free agency in an attempt to try and roster an actual NHL team because last season they had nobody. And so he did something he doesn't normally do, which is sign a lot of guys in free agency, which, mind you, a lot of those contracts are going to expire, like Perron, Olimata, Kubalik. They're not long contracts. So it's not like it's going to be eating a ton of cap space in the long term. And they have a lot of cap space coming up. So the cap structure of this team is still looking very good.
Yeah.
So like, but he has made bad moves. Obviously, we just mentioned Sherratt. We mentioned Perlini didn't work out. I would hesitate to call the Vrana trade a bad move because Mantha's been a healthy scratch with Washington. You got a first and a second round pick out of it as well, including Madison Bauer, who you did flip
There's
for
no
more
way
draft
that's
picks.
a bad move.
And you couldn't have
good
known
move.
what would happen with Vrana. That is all just like that's you can't predict that.
Even whatever happens with Vrana, that's a good trade. Like that's
you got a first round pick out of it.
You got a first and a second. Like that's
and a player that looked like he could be a budding star. It hasn't worked out that way,
and
and it's
still,
really unfortunate.
Who knows? No one knows Vrana's future, but like that's still like objectively, I think like a great trade. Yeah, it's definitely not in the bad category.
But my point being here is that this frustration is a good thing because it means that this team is a team in transition. It is a team that is improving and fans want more. And that is a good thing. The fact that we want more means that this team is getting better and that we just want them to continue to get better. I think being critical to Yzerman and being realistically critical, not like crazy critical.
Be critical of every move.
Yeah.
You should be. But
like, I mean, like, in the realm of realism, don't be like,
no, but that's my
don't
point.
Be crazy.
Like everyone should be critical of every move or like put under a microscope or have their own opinion on every single move. You can be critical of every move and be like, oh, is that smart? Is that dumb? Whatever. And there's a difference between moves in a vacuum and big picture. That's what I've been trying to say this whole time, I guess, and haven't articulated very well. Like there's a huge difference between being critical of individual moves as they happen and going, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. Or that's not going to work out. Or I disagree with that versus taking a step back, looking at the big picture and going, okay, well, this is a team that has like very clearly been trending in the right direction over the last 3 years and is continuing to do so, presumably.
Absolutely. Let's take another quick break. Got to talk to you guys today about Built Bar. And then when we come back, you mentioned the big picture thing, and that is something I want to hammer home. But first, Built Bars. Looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and calories, and you got to try Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little healthier. I made it to the gym again, Scotty, 2 days in a row. I'm trying to get back on track. Did 20 minutes on the stair stepper. I thought my heart was going to come out my mouth. It was beating so fast, but I had motivation to come home in the form of a Built Bar. Those cookies and cream puffs, man, ever since we got those as a sample, they've been a staple in my cabinet, and that's because they're so good. Covered in 100% real chocolate. And of course, they're not the lone flavors that taste amazing. You got churro, you got peanut butter brownie, you got coconut almond. And I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros, 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait to get a box. For years, we've been talking about Built Bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Head to Walmart, get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. Go to Sam's Club, you can get a 13-bar box. Buy in bulk when you go to Sam's Club. With brownie batter or churro, you'll thank us later. Go to Built.com, go to Sam's Club, or go to Walmart. You will not regret it. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scott Bentley.
Brian Fisher.
You said that so softly. Whispering sweet
Brian
nothings in my
Fisher.
ear. No, I don't like that. Go back to the sweet nothings. You brought up a fantastic point in the big picture thing. And the point of this episode is, and we kind of had a little clickbaity title with, is Steve Yzerman untouchable? We both agree that you can be critical, and it's good to be critical of Yzerman when moves are made. But we're both in agreement that this team is headed in a good direction still. It may take way longer than any of us want it to. That's just reality.
At any level. Like I'm impatient too. I want to win immediately too. But
you heard us after every single game when they lose.
We
we're
literally
frustrated.
just our jobs are to just complain about how we want more. Like that's literally what we do for a living. So like I promise it's way more fun to cover good teams than bad teams. Like we want it more than anybody. But it's. Look at like the history of turnarounds and rebuilds and stuff. Like he was giving literally nothing, and there's 2 players from like when he took over that are like still around in Bert Larkin.
Rasmussen was a Holland draft pick,
right,
as was Veleno and Zadina.
Right, that was the same draft, yeah.
Yeah, that's 2018 and 2017 were those guys.
Right, so it's just like, I mean, you're talking about you can count them on one hand, like the amount of people that have like maintained through this. Like he was given nothing, and
Hronek too. We're starting to add on, so two hands.
Yes, sure. I mean, for sure. It's just he was given so little to work with, and has gotten us to a point with where there is constant growth. Like, don't blindly follow. Like, obviously, don't blindly follow anyone ever. Like, like we can go big picture. We're not even talking about sports. Just like that. That's wild to me. Like, I wouldn't do that to anyone. But it doesn't.
But okay, so I agree with what you're saying, and I feel like I say I agree with you every single episode because I usually do. But when you say the big picture stuff, I wanted to bring this up, and this is a key point. When you're talking about this team that Steve Yzerman has built, you have to realize that this is not the final product. How many Steve Yzerman draft picks are currently playing for the Detroit Red Wings, Scotty?
Oh yeah, well, I think kind of same question worded differently. Like, how many draft picks are we excited about that are waiting in the wings?
You mentioned earlier how full this cabinet is now. There's still, we have yet to see this. And Steve Yzerman is a staunch believer of building through the draft. So while it's okay to be critical of him on every single move he's made, you also have to keep in mind this is not his final product. He's still working his magic. He's still cooking, as the kids say. Marco Kasper's a guy he just took first round, but you go drafts earlier than that. Carter Mazur, fantastic season with Denver. You have Amadeus Lombardi, who just signed his ELC. Elmer Soderblom made the team, and he was another guy that was a 6th round draft pick. Obviously, you have Jonathan Berggren, which I think was he a Holland draft pick or was he? I can't quite remember. I think he might have been 2018, so that might have been a Holland draft pick. So that's not even an Yzerman draft pick. There are still so many Yzerman draft picks who have not yet debuted at the NHL level who are getting close. William Wallander, Donovan Sabrango, guys like Albert Johansson, who's having a great year down there with Grand Rapids, Simon Edvinsson. This team has a cabinet full of Yzerman draft picks who have yet to make the difference. And when those guys start becoming an everyday NHL player on the Red Wings roster, that is when I think it becomes more imperative that this team takes a large step forward. Because if those guys don't work out, then you can start saying, okay, Yzerman, the big believer of building through the draft, his draft picks haven't worked out. But every single every single indication that we have so far on these draft picks, Scotty, is that they look like and they are trending towards being Detroit Red Wings. I mean, I would be shocked if Amadeus Lombardi does not. Actually, he did sign his ELC. It's Carter Mazur, who I'm waiting to sign his ELC on. These guys, we haven't even seen Yzerman's image of what this team should be, his picture of what this team should be to the fullest yet. And so, well, yes, be critical of his free agent signings, but keep in mind that even your Cops and your Ben Sherratts are meant to be on the last year or two of their deals when this team is supposed to be Stanley Cup contenders, because that's when the players that Yzerman has drafted are supposed to be in the NHL. We haven't even seen a shred of what this team is supposed to look like.
The way that the cap is structured too, like there's so much flexibility and there's so many moves that this team can still and will still make over the next 24 months. So like, I don't know. Like I said earlier, I very much think you shouldn't blindly like just follow and just be like, oh yeah, like I'm not going to be critical or even analyze any move he makes because I just fully trust it. But at the same time, the other extreme I think is just like off base as well. Like this organization is heading in a much better direction, has a lot more hope than they did when he took over. And I don't know. I do not trust Ken Holland to do what Yzerman has done over the last 3 years.
I mean, did you see that Duncan Keith contract that he signed him to last season?
Anyways,
we have to do a game preview of the Calgary Flames, big Edmonton Oilers rivals, who the Red Wings just played. So good.
The Battle of Alberta.
Yeah, great series that was.
Great, dude.
But Calgary Flames are fifth in their division, but they're pretty well above 500 so far, but they're playing in a tough Pacific division. That Pacific division is probably as tough. I wouldn't say as tough, but maybe a slight step down in difficulty as the Atlantic division. Definitely one of the toughest in the NHL. Calgary Flames are no slouch. They have taken a step back this year, much like the Florida Panthers, who are involved in that big breaking trade where they acquired Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar for Kachuk. They did also lose Goudreau. So Calgary Flames shuffling around of superstars on their roster have taken a step back, but they're still a very good hockey team. They have Elias Lindholm, who's their team leader in points, 46 points in 50 games played. Tyler Toffoli, 43 points in 51 games played. They're second in the league in Corsi 4, and that they get a lot of shots on net, but their goaltending is probably their biggest weakness. Their main goal starter, what the heck is that? Their main starter in net, goalie, Jacob Markstrom, has a save percentage of .892. Well, Dan Vladar, who's their backup, has actually been pretty impressive at .906. But goaltending and defense seem to be struggling, and offense as well. I mean, they got a lot of shots on net, but they're not converting a whole lot, it feels like.
Yeah, for sure. I still really like this Flames team, to be honest
their
with
jerseys.
You. Yes, for sure. I still like the roster, I guess I should say. But I still really like where this team is at. Obviously, they took a big hit in the offseason, but they're right there. I think they're tied. Did you say where they were at in the wild card?
I didn't.
Picture.
No.
I'm pretty sure they're tied with the Avalanche, but I think they have a couple of games in hand on the Avs. So maybe that's not fair to bring up. But they're really close. They're right on the cusp of like that wild card. They're right, I think, 3 points back from Edmonton in the Pacific. So like they're right still on the cusp. They still have a lot of really like electric, honestly, young pieces. Like that was not just a top heavy, one-man team last year. Obviously losing Goudreau is just going to be a hit in general, but like they still have a lot of really nice pieces. So you know what? The Wings are home dogs, and like I totally understand why. I think that's totally fair to be to put the Wings as home underdogs here. I really like the Flames, and I think the biggest thing that jumps off when looking, we do like our team stats, kind of where they fall. You talked about the Corsi 4 percentage. It's a really good penalty kill, which is, we talk about a lot how the special teams have made or broke. I don't know why I said it past tense like that. They make or break a lot of Red Wings games, and this could be one where it's no different. They do find themselves in the penalty box a lot. They're in the bottom 10 in the league in PIMS, but they're in the top 5, I think, in penalty kill. So that's going to be kind of a tall task amongst other things. Where you already mentioned the Wings definitely first and foremost need to do well 5-on-5, but behind the 8 ball in that and special teams going into it might be kind of a bleak look.
We talk a lot about the kids. I don't know where I was going with that. Let me restart that sentence.
I don't know either, dude.
Let me restart that sentence.
That was crazy.
I was talking a lot about how they took a step back this year. And I don't want to color it as in they're a bad team. Because when I say that, I'm comparing it to how dominant they were last season.
No, oh yeah, 100%.
They took a step back in comparison to how dominant they were last season, but they're still a playoff.
It's like when we talk about the Wings
and they're
defense.
Still better than the Red Wings in every regard.
It's like when we talk about the Wings defense.
Yeah.
Last year it was really bad. This year it's better, but it's like still bad.
Yeah, their Corsi against is middle of the pack, and their Corsi 4 is top half of the league. They're not like the best of the best, but they're still a playoff contender easily in pretty much every regard. And like you said, the Red Wings are home dogs because they're still a better team than the Detroit Red Wings. So let's go through our FanDuel Sportsbook odds. You have the Calgary Flames have plus odds for minus 1.5 goals. And the Red Wings, obviously, that means they have minus odds at plus 1.5 goals. Try to say that as clean as I can. Are you taking Calgary minus 1.5 for the dog on that, or Detroit Red Wings plus 1.5 as the favorite?
I think I would not put any units on either of those if I were a betting man. But if you made me choose, I would probably just take the plus money.
So you're going to take Calgary Flames minus 1.5.
If I had to choose, yes, but
I'm
I think
making you
my
choose.
first choice would be not to go on either of those because I think that that's a really close call.
It is a really close call, and I'm going to take the Red Wings on this one, plus 1.5. I think they're gonna find the back of the net a little bit more than they did in the last game because the goaltending for Calgary is struggling in this, and they are at home now. The money line is Calgary favored, Red Wings dogs at home.
Yeah, like I'm gonna kind of flip here. I think again, like if you were to take either of these, I think it would make more sense to take the Red Wings at home and get plus money for it. I think that makes more sense from a betting perspective. But I don't know. I don't think I'd touch this game. Period. To be
I,
honest with you, this is a really like weird game to bet on. You would have to be pretty confident in your picks.
I'll flip and I'll say I'll take the Calgary at money line. So Calgary to win, but the Red Wings to keep it within a goal and a half, essentially.
Sure.
Now over under set to 6 right now. Both are minus odds. Over under 6. I'll say over. I'll lead. I'll say over. Over 6.
Okay, I'll take the under then.
I think over 6 is pretty easy to hit in the NHL this day. Scoring's up in the league this year, and both goaltenders are going through rough patches. So I think over 6 is easy. Okay. Any final thoughts?
We ball.
We'll be back tomorrow with a game recap. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.